Happy birthday to you.
Oh, God.
Happy birthday to you. Happy
I thought we were over
birthday, dear James. Happy birthday to you. How you doing?
Really
Welcome to Freya's
goodness.
Pre-Practice Fridays.
Happy birthday, listener.
It is James's birthday. Thank you for joining me so early in the morning on your 37th year on this planet.
How dare you?
How are you going?
On my 33rd year, thank you, on the planet. Look, I am. That's all I am. Thank you so much for asking. After the domestic travel that I've done, bloody time zone changes now, daylight savings changes. Who knows? Who knows what day it is? Who knows what time it is? I have some filter coffee from Tommy T that will get me through the next couple of days to try and figure out where I am. But thank you for the birthday wishes. Happy birthday to you, listener, too, as if it is your birthday. Congratulations on being born on the correct day.
It's a new segment, is birthday shout-outs, actually. So if that's you or if it's one of your mates and they listen to the podcast, then feel free to send through their name and date of birth, and I will gift them my voice, which is,
Send help.
What else could you
Please
want?
no. No more.
Oh, dear. Very good. Well, correct day or not, it is Thursday or Friday, depending on where you're listening. Freya's F1 Fridays. It is, does what it says on the tin, right?
Exactly.
Thank you for the naming. Thank you for the naming submission, James, otherwise known as Freya's Pre-Practice Fridays. Let's start off, as we usually do, with news of the week. There hasn't been heaps going on this week. We're all kind of sitting tight patiently as far as the driver market goes. So let's start with our own news on Lakeside Drive. And for me, that is 50 points to Gryffindor, aka when it comes to the magic of editing last weekend, our magical editor last week in terms of making Campy somehow logical all by himself. So I'm going to say front of the grid, whatever the opposite of the penalty is.
Well done, Zeke.
Zeke, front of the grid for you.
Just immediate cancellation of the race and given the podium. Here you go. Here's the trophy. Here's the champagne. Don't everyone pack up, go home.
Exactly. So front of the grid for Zeke. You, on the other hand, James and Tommy T, you're right at the back. You failed to show up for your own podcast. So that's about as bad as it gets in my books.
I think that the most hilarious thing is we were both in the same city without realising it. I had no idea that Tommy T wasn't in Melbourne. I thought full well that he was showing up to the studio at his birthday. Anyway, that would be incorrect. Apparently he told Campy. Campy didn't then feed that information back. And after attending a wedding on Sunday in Sydney, I was in absolutely no state to record anything. So, happy to take a pit lane start because I'll change my everything to do with the internal
and you
components.
Can drive
to be fair, I wish I could do that.
You can drive over a wheel gun on the way, and then you can come back in and fix your tyre. That's how. That's what you deserve after that showing last week.
I would say though that it is nothing to do with Campy's ability to talk, but everything to do with Zeke's ability to continue to move the conversation along. I will also, however, give Campy a penalty for completely missing Alpine. He saw in the notes that I put together, he saw the double DNF for, let's have a look, Williams DNF, Alpine DNF, and he completely missed Alpine altogether. So I would have liked to have heard about Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso or Monday, Campy. So how dare you? How dare you? It's like 350 Grand Prix for Fernando Alonso. Doesn't even mention it once. So have a 5-place grid penalty, Campy.
Absolutely, that sounds well deserved. And Alonso wouldn't be having any of that. Let's be honest. So there has been the news, and the news is that there's no news on the financial review. FIA have said that this is really just a non-news news section. The FIA have said that it'll no longer happen in terms of getting an outcome yesterday, which was when it had been expected, and now not until the 10th of October. The statement reads, the FIA informs the conclusion of the analysis of the 2021 financial submissions of the Formula One teams and the subsequent release of certifications of compliance to the financial regulations will not take place on Wednesday, 5th of October. The analysis of financial submissions is a long and complex process that is ongoing and will be concluded to enable the release of the certificates on Monday, 10th October. The financial regulations were agreed unanimously by all competitors who have worked positively and collaboratively with the FIA cost cap administration throughout this first year under the financial. I'm still going. I hate
these press releases so much.
As previously communicated, there has been significant and substantiated speculation and conjecture in relation to this matter. I'm too old to
listen to this now.
And the FIA reiterates, well, you are too old. That's confirmed. Happy birthday. That until it is finalised, no further information.
My birthday, I want this press release to stop.
Provided. I have one more sentence to go. The FIA also reiterates that any suggestion that the FIA personnel have disclosed sensitive information is equally baseless. Opinions, James.
The FIA is about as watertight as a sieve when it comes to information and leaking stuff, quite honestly. I believe none of anything. Not A, because I wasn't really listening. B, because how much of a joke is this really for this organisation? They can't get the starts right to a Grand Prix. Why have wet tyres when you can't use them? I know there's safety involved. I think Campy said this as well, but guys, start the Grand Prix. Just start it, okay? That's the whole point. There's wet tyres. It's been raining. Put them on. Let them run around the place. There's enough tech pro at Singapore to stop serious incidents and injuries. Then they can't even get this right. How is delaying by a week going to help this? Either Red Bull cheated or not. That's it. Hamilton's either going to have his 8th World Championship announced this on Monday, or maybe they figured it out and went, oh, no, we can't do this because Max needs all the attention from my bloody tinfoil Daniel Ricciardo President Momentum Bright Peach hat beanie of Japan is going to be where Honda wins, then that's it. I don't understand why other reasons why they would delay it so long. I mean, it's honestly just so much of a farce. Oh, yes, bucket hat. Hang on. Put this over my headphones in the best way possible. This is only exclusively for our YouTube viewers.
Our tin
that is
foil.
Such a good bucket hat.
I'm so happy about it. Finally, they made some merch that's actually relevant to my part of the world. Although I will say there are definitely track pants in my order as well. It's like, you don't need track pants. You don't need track pants. Buys the track pants. No, our headwear is exclusively Daniel Ricciardo themed tin. But you're right in terms of what.
Very good.
What can they do right at this point? No, it's like
Nothing.
You said, there was some great memes that came out of that, the start from last weekend. It's like, in case you've ever felt useless, just remember that wet tyres exist, and you're going, oh, yeah, that's absolutely spot on. But to your point, Chris Medland kind of said this, where he said he reported, look, there's two scenarios that are going to play out here once they do issue those certifications. Either there's going to be teams facing sanctions of some kind, or there are going to be apologies and there will not be teams facing sanctions. There's going to be one or two outcomes. It's more about what those sanctions are going to be if there is, in fact, found to be a breach of the financial regulations and the cost cap. So I think, though, what's important, I know a lot of people kind of saying, even if they do find some sort of breach there, the FIA aren't going to do anything, but it's so important that they do, because the flow-on
which is exactly
effect,
why they won't.
The flow-on effect of overspending last year would have had such a massive impact on this year's car, and then of course next year's, and so on and so forth. That if they don't, well, what's the point? Everyone just goes, great, I'll spend $100 million, get over, and then get a $50 million fine. I'm still 50 up, and and we won the championship twice. So where's the motivation to operate within the rule books if there's not hefty resulting actions or sanctions?
To be serious, apart from slagging the FIA, I think it's really an interesting point in time for Formula One. And I was on Sport FM in Perth yesterday asked this question around, is 24 races too much? Immediately, yes, is the answer. But one of the points that the host brought up which I think is a good one, is how does Formula One keep those existing fans, the fans who have been following the sport for more than Drive to Survive length of time, engaged and feeling relevant, versus just overdoing it, where you're trying to grow too much and you're trying to have too much of a spectacle, trying to be more entertainment rather than an actual sport, to disaffect one half of your audience, the OGs. And because the new half of the audience doesn't necessarily have that much skin in the game, when they get bored of the race, like, they're not going to watch Miami, they're not going to watch Las Vegas, they're not going to watch Abu Dhabi or whatever. It just is what it is. So I think you're right. It's an incredibly important moment for the sport as a whole. If Red Bull are found to have overspent, then serious implications need to be put in place. And it's nothing to do with money, can I just say. Like, any kind of financial penalty at all anyone really, apart from the teams at the back of the grid, and they're not going to do the wrong thing, A, because they can't afford to, B, because they've probably got some good things in place to make sure they don't, to ensure that they're not ever faced with any kind of penalty. I imagine Jos Capito is absolutely on it when it comes to that sort of stuff. It needs to be on track, because that's all the points, the championships, and the wins. Exactly. No one remembers who won the Constructors' Championship. They only remember the lead driver winning the final race for the championship, and in that instance, it's Max Verstappen. So, look, it's going to be very interesting. There's absolutely no doubt, though, that Max Verstappen is winning in the next two races. It's either going to be here in Japan with the fastest lap, or it's going to be in Austin, which I cannot wait for both of these races, can I just say. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. And the new DR merch drop that just happened, the DR3 Rodeo.
This stuff has just
Freya,
arrived. I can't do it anymore.
Too bad. Even Max wants one of those shirts. He was wearing the very, if you go onto the shop, the very last page, just in turning the bucket hat inside out does not make it a new hat. Oh, it does make it a new hat. Oh, I was wrong. Unbelievable. Look, I think it's just going to be an interesting time for the FIA, because if they don't make the right decision here, then all credibility out the window. The sport becomes a bit of a joke. And, I don't think Max, one way or the other, really cares, because if it's his first championship last year or his first championship this year, he's still going to be dominant for the next couple of years, I think. And there's no shadow of a doubt at the moment that he is the best driver on the grid. The way that he controls that car, although trying to overtake those McLarens, maybe not so good. But just thinking about where he was going around Singapore, he was on completely different lines most of the time than everyone else, finding grip where he had absolutely no place trying to find it. So, I think the FIA are really at a crossroads here if they don't do the right thing, or make a decision that is widely accepted. And, of course, you can have Max fans, if the decision is, give the title to Lewis, you can have Max fans upset and Lewis fans excited. And if it's no further action, then Lewis fans are still going to be upset and Max fans are going to be excited. I still think the way that Michael Massey has been treated is absolutely disgusting. It's just sport, guys. It's absolutely nothing to do with life and death. And even Christian Horner, in his interview, which I know you and Campy spoke a little bit about what he said about DR, but I think what he said about Michael Massey was more important to me. The fact that he reached out and was still in contact with Massey, because at the end of the day, he's just a human being. And none of us were the race director, so none of us have any ability to call out what was right or what was wrong about that situation. It just is what it is, right?
I think that's the thing is, if a championship is going to be – sorry, my hair's going to get too warm. I don't need the beanie for – like temperature regulation, Campy does. So otherwise I'll get too hot.
Goodness me.
It might make a comeback a bit later on. If a championship's going to be taken away last year, I think it's going to be hard for people to accept it being on a financial regulation basis. I think when it came to the decision making in that last race, that's something that people will be on one side or the other, and will, like you said, either be pro or against. Whereas I think on this basis is difficult for people to kind of connect the dots potentially, especially from an emotional perspective, between overspending and results on track at the end of the day there, especially, like I said, when it comes to not just that year, but the years ahead as well. And I'm just not convinced that would have a similar reaction to, retracting a championship based on on-track decisions, for example. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be one outcome or the other. Either way, someone's going to end up looking a bit sheepish and having to, kind of apologise. Well, they probably won't. There will be sanctions. But like you said, I think those penalties have to be on track because there's just so much money in this sport, and any type of penalty on that front. And you even hear it. It's tricky because I hear what he's saying, but there was that issue last weekend with Hamilton keeping his nose ring in. And one of the journalists kind of said,
had a note from his doctor.
Yeah, exactly. All of his stuff. But they said, are you worried about the penalties because it's likely to be a fine? Are you worried about the financial implications? And he just goes, no. I don't really care at this point. No. That's just not a way that hurts, like you said, those top teams who are the ones who are likely to be implicated. But moving on, probably my favourite part.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Sorry. I know that's a really stupid thing to do to the host. It happens to me often. Now I'm doing it to you. I do apologise. But can I just say, when it comes to anything seriously, like these. Correct, thank you. The hot takes that obviously we have on this podcast and everything else, some of it is informed, some of it is just opinion. But what I would say, and it was a question that I had during the week, what is a good place to go and get information from? And you mentioned his name, but Chris Medland, quite honestly, is one of the best journalists in Formula One at the moment. He is not swayed in any direction. He guest writes for Formula One. He writes for Racer.com. So does Michael Laminato. So Racer.com is where I go for all of my written information. And listener, I think you should go there too. It covers not only Formula One, but a whole range of other sports too. They've got a really good collection of freelance journalists who write for them. And if they're not any good, then they get booted out. And then sort of the more traditional autosport, that kind of stuff for YouTube they seem to be pretty switched on. The race is interesting. It can be good, can be bad. Others can be good or bad. But yeah, Chris Medland, Laminato, Racer.com, genuinely is for the cost cap stuff, for the driver market, all of that sort of other stuff. The problem with Fox Sports is, I know Lamo writes for them, but more often than not, there's the idiot news.com.au writers end up somehow on the Fox Sports website. So just ignore that and just go to Racer.com. Freya, my apologies. Let's move on.
Apology accepted, but only because you're coming to grips with the fact that you're now 50 years old. So that's all right. Moving on, and when
man yells at clouds.
Exactly. But in terms of where to get your content, other fun, just Instagram. Not for anything actually requiring research or legitimate sources, but for videos of people singing karaoke, it's perfect, which is exactly what happened this week, which is Gasly and Yuki. And I don't really see the value a lot of the time in talking about, drivers' social media or whatever else. You can go and look at it if you like that type of content. But this was absolute gold. And I think it's partially because for me with Yuki, we don't see that much of him. He kind of sneaks under the radar a lot of the time, and you've got others who are so in the public eye and give us so much content, or they're kind of promoting themselves in all sorts of different ways. But there was just something about watching Yuki be completely Yuki that I just absolutely loved, and of course being in Japan added that. But James, what would your karaoke song be?
It's only and always Run to Paradise by Choir Boys. It is my default, always has been, always will be my default when I get into anything to do with it. Although overseas, I doubt that they've got Run to Paradise by Choir Boys. So I'd probably have to go with my OG favourite band, which is The Darkness, and I'll just crank out I Believe in a Thing Called Love. I would just say this.
Your range has got to be good.
If you want more Yuki content... My range is great, thank you. As an old man, I can say that's a shame. Zeke knows my range is actually fairly decent. if you want more Yuki content, the best place to go is actually to follow AlphaTauri's social media manager, who is a fellow Australian, Josh Cruz with a K. And I'm pretty sure his handle, whilst I look it up, is Cruise Control. It is, yeah. Cruz, CTRL, but with a K. He spends a lot of time with Yuki, more time than anyone else spends with Yuki by all accounts. But there's always a lot of fun on his stories of Yuki doing random stuff, like being unable to use chopsticks, for example, which is very interesting considering he's from Japan. But I loved this video for many reasons. Firstly, they're singing Adele. Secondly, I've never seen Yuki that emotional about anything. I find someone like you, I can only imagine, is like something that he's eating has fallen on the floor and he doesn't want to eat it anymore because he's so intent on food always. So I imagine that's where his heart was in that sport. What about you, Freya? Who are you singing if you get into a karaoke bar in downtown Cayman?
It's got to be my OG, which is Robbie Williams. Everything Robbie Williams just has a very special place in my heart. And you can call, that type of thing, what do they call it? Shame. What is it? Like your secret indulgence or something like that.
This is making great content.
Yeah, I know. There's a word that I'm thinking of and I can't remember. Anyway, we can just put a marker in there. Robbie Williams, it is.
No, absolutely not. Staying in.
What is
my birthday? I'll cry over it as I want to.
Yeah, but it's my show, so that's what I'm telling you to do. Robbie Williams, Angels, all the way. But let's stick with Yuki because the other thing which he has provided this weekend is an epic helmet design, which is just stunning.
Yes.
I think. As has VB. Love VBs too. So look forward to seeing those on track. Other bits of news just coming out of press conferences today and yesterday. There's not, like I said, not too much when it comes to upgrades and driver markets and things like that. DR will obviously get the upgrades that Norris had last weekend, so we'll see how that goes for him on this track. It's interesting in that Lando last week didn't seem to have a phenomenal advantage on pace with Daniel last weekend. So we'll see if both of them have any type of improvement this weekend. Alpha upgrades new front wing. So hopefully that helps them with the kind of high speed corners this weekend and help them with getting a bit more downforce. I hope that Alpha gets some points this weekend. We'll get to kind of talk a bit later about what we're excited about when it comes to Japan, but when it comes to both of those drivers, I just really feel like they're due a bit of luck. And especially with VB's helmet, I want to see that thing perform.
Can I just say also, one of the things that I love at this point is because Japan's only just opened up to tourists
Guilty
again,
pleasure.
and they're still
That's
more on the conservative
That's the
side.
word I was thinking of earlier. Sorry.
Good. Well, I'm glad that we got there in the end. Yes, word being two words.
The word that I was going to say,
what I was
going to say about that was that I have no guilt about it whatsoever. Anyway, continue.
It's just purely pleasure.
Yep.
And when it comes to Robbie, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to Japan, the press conferences, of course, because they're still sort of coming out of the COVID way that a lot of us sort of did 6-7 months ago, they've still got the plastic screens up. And I really like the other outstanding video content is Max Verstappen sitting next to Daniel Ricciardo doing the bloody stupid faces on the screen. And it's something that I just, no one else does that kind of stuff with anyone else in the paddock except for Daniel. And this is not talking about where he's going or anything, but Max is always super serious or super pissed off, or if DR's in the frame, having a bloody good time. Like he's just laughing and you can tell they're absolutely mates. But I love that he's turning around and doing the mime wall and everything else. So look, those plastic partitions, absolutely not keeping COVID away from anyone, just purely there for our entertainment.
I did enjoy that as well. Like you said, he seems to bring out a different part of other people's personality or character, which we don't see otherwise, and just another reason that I will continue to spend money on things that I don't need.
There it is. Oh, shit. Put it back on.
Don the hats.
Excellent.
Other bits coming out of press conferences, I think, and you could see it in that activity in the press conferences, everyone's just so glad to be back. like with Singapore, the drivers are just so happy to be here, which is just really apparent. And I think that makes for a better weekend for everybody when, we're on a track which we love and that the drivers love, because when they're enjoying it, we're enjoying it is certainly my experience anyway. Interesting from Charles talking about kind of what they need to do this year and next year in order to try and start challenging for world championships. He's kind of said, performance is now issue. It's getting it all together, which is not, it's not news, but it's very interesting, I think, hearing that come from the driver in such a kind of concise way, to saying performance isn't a problem. It's about piecing all of those different elements of a weekend that make something work, actually getting all of those right, which again, we know, but I find it interesting to hear drivers and members of the team being able to point very specifically to those things as well, kind of confirming what we suspect is going on within teams. Similarly, Alonso kind of pointing towards reliability being their issues this weekend and kind of being their downfall. Yeah. And he said, if we do lose that fourth place in the constructors by the end of the year to McLaren, which at the moment McLaren is sitting in fourth ahead of Alpine, he said, he's likely to be reliability issues that will be our downfall and see us to fall back in constructors. So, I obviously,
you can only imagine Piastri's face after Singapore, can't you? You'd be like, I made the right decision there, didn't I?
100%. It's an interesting one because they seemed widely. I wouldn't have described reliability as their issue necessarily in terms of the weekends that haven't gone so well. But at the same time, if that's what he feels is kind of an issue, sometimes you go, okay, what are we actually talking about when we talk about reliability? Obviously, there's reliability when it comes to your power units, but reliability is also it's presence of consistency as well, right? And that comes down to performance too, and it's that every single weekend showing up and being able to challenge for whether it's best of the rest, which is kind of where Alpine is sitting at the moment, and not having any issues kind of getting in their way. So what happens there. Now, the one thing that was said in a press conference, which I find very alarming and wildly concerning for everybody, is Latifi. Obviously, we've got a bunch of people who haven't raced here before, and Latifi said, so I did my track walk and, obviously I've heard from other drivers about the track and I've watched lots of races, but being here in person, it's a lot narrower and there's more banking than I expected. And I was like, oh, dear.
Oh, God. Yeah. Well, he absolutely stuffed Joe's race last weekend. That was absolutely no good whatsoever. Look, I think Frederick Vasseur said it, best. Sometimes it's reliability, sometimes it's Nicholas Latifi. I think this is a track that absolutely favours the brave, Japan, and Suzuka is such a brilliant technical track. It's got high speed corners, it's got medium and low speed corners. Just so excited for 130R. I know Campy and I talk about it often, but this is just absolute bliss when it comes to tracks. But oh God, Nicholas Latifi. Let's maybe he just has a hand again in delaying the championship for Max Verstappen another weekend.
It does seem likely based on those comments. And then the last kind of, I suppose, news of the week is F1 TV for Fox Sports. James, do you want to tell us all about that?
Thank God. Thank God, at no extra cost. Although I don't know if it's for Fox or if you can get it through KO here in Australia. This is only an Australian thing. If you can get it through KO or...
I thought they...
God, it better be. Sick and tired of having to listen to the crap that comes through Sky Sports. Dear listener, here is some good news for you. If you do have Fox Sports then or KO, you can get F1 TV, and that means that you can have other non-Sky F1 commentary for the race, and it is no extra cost to you. You can have, you can choose which car you want to ride on with. You can listen to team radio. You can do all that sort of other stuff, which you should be able to do anyway here, with if not for Fox's stupid geo-blocking of that app already. But for next year, yes, that seems to be where it is. Watch that price go up, though, as a result of that happening. We already paid too much per month for it as it is, but it's good news, and it means that you can listen to the dulcet tones of Will Buxton. I only imagine that he says, it's lights out. And then maybe towards the end of the race, he finishes by saying, and away we finish.
And away we go.
And that's it. That's the whole commentary. And that's it. But no, you'll have other people like Laura Winter, Felipe Massa, Alex Brundle will occasionally jump in there as well. So I think the great thing is it's just some more choice for us. And it's one of the things that we always wanted down here is more choice to what we have to listen to. And noting Sky F1 has announced its extension till 2029 with for the UK provider for F1 that's way too long, but there you go. Interesting enough, so we don't have to suffer through it, which is good news. It's good news, everyone, for us here down in the Forgotten Land.
It is good news. Like you said, more choice, and it will no doubt be paying for it, but more choice, and that just gives you better insight. It has a better weight. Your whole race weekend is more interesting because you have more information.
Yes.
You're able to follow the things which are most interesting to you. You know, if you are an Ocon fan, you can go and, you know, watch his race more closely because you won't see it otherwise. So that is good. That is good news. All right, let's get into our profile for this week. We are taking a slightly different turn in comparison to some of our previous roles, which have been centred around kind of engineering and different elements of roles that are part of developing Formula One car. For this week, we're looking kind of a bit more closely to some of the commercial side of things of Formula One. So we're going to have a look at Chloe Target-Adams, who is the Global Director of Race Promotion for Formula One. So bit about background first, as we always do. Chloe says that she has now, I find this fascinating actually. God, I haven't even said anything and it's already interesting. Gosh. Purely because of how we talk about Formula One. So Chloe says that she's like, I always wanted to work in the entertainment industry since she was young. I was like, I just find it interesting that when we're talking about Formula One, you refer to entertainment. Now, it's because her dad was a musician and he toured the world with his musical work, and she was quite inspired by that. But still, I just find it interesting referring back to the entertainment industry when we're talking about Formula One, because it tells us a lot of what we already know, where it is not just about sport and competition. It is about, it is about entertainment. It's part of the entertainment industry in a lot of ways, whether you like it or not. But beyond that, she trained as a lawyer and worked for several firms in London, and in her latter role covering media and entertainment clients, again kind of going down that preference for working in the entertainment industry. And it wasn't until 2009 that she joined F1 actually as an in-house counsel role. So again, still kind of practicing those qualifications when it comes to being an attorney or lawyer, depending on what part of the world you're in and the language that we use. But interestingly, as in an interview with Financial Times, she's kind of acknowledged that at that time she didn't really know much about F1. She kind of joined this business. I didn't really know anything about it except that it was a global sport series, which is quite different to other people who we find, whether it's in the paddock, in the garage, back in factories, have had this dream of working for Formula One, has kind of come into it knowing that it's global and it's in sport, but that's about it. Her role very much changed in 2012, and I can only imagine that this would have been a role that would have required the patience of a saint, working alongside Bernie Ecclestone on race promotion. You cannot, like I said, working with somebody who is that eccentric on a regular basis and who has certain ways of going about business as well, which you can imagine that depending on what your style is might not always align, would only be challenging. So that tells me something about her character and her ability to still be in the sport. And in several interviews actually that I was reading in researching her role, there are a lot of reflections on, the diplomat behind F1 race promotion and that type of thing. So I would say that's very likely to be both a trait and a skill that allows her to be so successful in this role. But in 2017, moved into a role as Global Director of Promoters and Business Relations. This is only a couple of months after the takeover by Liberty Media. And following that takeover, she was very much charged with changing how deals and race promotions worked. So part of that has actually been helping hosts and promoters market their event rather than leaving ticket sale numbers kind of up to them. So again, this is kind of in particular in reflection of an interview that she did with Financial Times. One of her biggest goals was trying to change the responsibilities or shift those responsibilities when it comes to ticket sales, because it's better for everybody when an event actually sells out. So it's one thing you can say, as a location, we'll spend X amount, we'll buy a race event essentially to host it for X amount of money, but then F1 would kind of say, great, done. Now it's over to you to sell your tickets in order to try and get a return on that spend. Her approach was very much, now how do we help you to market this event? And one of the events that she actually reflects on is Japan, and helping them to design a strategy to very much market the Japan race to China, which was highly effective when it came to seeing increases in other elements of their economy, including in obviously tourism and the like, but very much kind of partnering with them beyond the initial agreement in terms of a big change that she put in place.
Yeah, I think working with promoters, which effectively is the tracks around the world, that's in the language that these guys use, it would be incredibly interesting. And as you sort of said and is written here, no 2 days are the same. No, absolutely not, because no two racetracks are the same except for all of the American races and all of the Italian races and all of the other races. Anyway, but you're dealing with significant cultural things. You're dealing with different track sizes. You're dealing with either home races for like Daniel Ricciardo or Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton or others. So trying to figure out how, a best strategy for that, I think is really incredibly important. But the shift between Bernie, you pay me and I don't give a crap about what you do, versus Liberty Media, which is, when we're still in that growth stage now, we've seen it. I mean, Chase Carey did such a good job in reinvigorating Formula One. I think he never gets enough credit, especially when Stefano now is, in charge. So the way that has worked, and I'm sure that she would agree that Chase was very much, you're the SME, what can I do as CEO to support you in that respect too? So she probably had a lot of that ability to lead, and a lot of what we're seeing now, a couple of years later, would be those conversations that she's been leading and trying to set up an amazing array of different races and how it works. And okay, sometimes it doesn't always work. Miami's a good example of that, but first race out of the bag, maybe next year it'll be better because no one will be there because the ticket prices are too expensive. I don't know, but incredibly important work for this to happen.
Well, absolutely, and very much as you can imagine in terms of working with promoters, something that kind of shapes the future of the sport in a lot of ways. Obviously we've got the technology side of things that's shaping the future of the sport, and engineering developments and new technologies, as kind of mentioned. But this also makes a massive contribution because it changes, the countries in which we're going to. Therefore, the different spectator groups and cultures that are going to be part of this sport, which is a big part of it as well. So, as you said, she describes her role in terms of no 2 days being the same, especially on race weekends. So she does oversee the race commercial operations for F1, and therefore is, as you've kind of alluded to, is responsible for one of the primary revenue streams for this business. So you could also probably provide an alternative, job title for her, which is President of Money Making, because that is the heart of her role in terms of locking in and then maintaining agreements with governments and businesses that play host to and stage Grand Prix. So she would be the key contact for F1 race promoters and new race opportunities. So I'm blaming Vegas on her as well as Miami, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Come on, mate, lift.
Yeah, exactly. But her responsibilities very much cover the entire Formula One global footprint. So this isn't just about promoters in Europe or America. It's the global footprint, which, as we know, spans 150 races as of next year across 5 continents.
She's too efficient at her job.
I think exactly. I mean, everybody who we talk about in the world of Formula One is far too efficient at their job, but indeed, getting there very, very quickly. But as we've kind of described already, as you can imagine, that role very much shapes the future of the sport in terms of driving the commercial growth, but then also that strategy when it comes to your different spectator groups and where you're actually placing the sport. So we all know that F1 is about as global as it gets when it comes to sport and competition. And as we're all probably aware, they're aiming to further expand its global reach as well, which is something that Chloe in her role is very much leading the charge for. So as you can imagine, that basically means the US, but also Africa as well. And Chloe has openly said that she agrees that Africa should be one of the next tracks that they look to try and get on the list. So she mentioned that, and you can read about it in a short article on Paddock Magazine. But interesting for her to hear kind of say, yep, we're not on that continent. We need to be there. It doesn't make sense that we're not there if we can make it to every other part of the world. And that's something that obviously Lewis is quite strong about and that she agrees with. So I imagine that she, over the next couple of years, will be looking to establish a track in the future on that continent. But just going back to race day, as I've mentioned, no 2 days are the same. There's a variety of clients who they would meet with to discuss the business side of things, along with their promoters and hospitality teams and all of that type of thing, as well as the operational aspects of the event and all of the paddock club side of things, and all of those experience kind of packages and everybody who's involved with that, something that she's central to in terms of staying on top of over the course of a weekend. But going back to how she now describes the sport as somebody who went into it not really knowing much about it. In an interview with Emirates Woman last year, she was saying that she feels like Formula One is the perfect mix of athleticism, technology and engineering with live drama and entertainment in a way that no other sports can match up to. So in a way, based on that quote, it does sound like that she has, achieved that youthful dream of working in entertainment.
We often say this, we've often said this, I should say, on the podcast, and early on back in 2019 when we started, Campy was very much in this needs to be sport only and not entertainment bandwagon, and I was probably more in this bandwagon, which is it needs to be the combination of both, because it was dying when it wasn't entertainment and no one really cared about what was actually going on under the Bernie reign. So at the end there, at least, I mean, initially he was doing great things with the sport, but now it has to be a mix of entertainment. And no more is that true with the welcoming of box-to-box films coming in and filming Drive to Survive. There is drama. Yeah, it's amped up sometimes. Okay, it's television, but often that drama exists. That's what journalists are reporting, day in, day out. We now just get the visual representation of what that looks like behind the curtain, so to speak, with the drivers and team principals. So I think they've found the right mix. It is, as I said a little bit earlier in the podcast, though, it's hard to find a point where everyone is happy. So it's trying to figure out who is your main focus, who is the most important audience to retain for the next 5 years. And I'm sure that's absolutely in the back of her mind with all of the discussions that she's having.
I'm sure. And I wasn't going to kind of talk about it so much today, but she does refer to that in terms of, the importance of retaining those legacy tracks as well, in terms of saying, this sport has a serious history and it's dripping in amazing statistics and, rivalries. And we go back to each race and we reflect on previous winners and, Schumacher's won here 6 times and this person's won. You've got this amazing history you need to hold on to because there's a lot of value to that, as well as that being important to longer standing fans as well. So another element of her role, obviously she's very senior in the Formula One commercial world, which, as we know, is male dominated both in terms of her industry in the legal profession, but then also in Formula One as a sport as well. Now, in answering the question about being a female in a male dominated sport and an industry as well, Chloe very much turns to the fan base, which is as she describes, is a combination of its employees and its spectators. So at that point, this is looking at an interview that I mentioned earlier towards the end of last year, about 38% of Formula One employees are female, but for teams, it's as low as kind of 9%. So Haas at that point were very low. I think they only employed about 15 women at that point, which, yes, they're one of the smaller teams, but statistically, that's still quite small. So she very much refers to, and I actually really like that in terms of talking about the fan base being the employees and spectators, and points to initiatives like We Race as one, because part of that is, it's not just raising awareness, it's actually doing things to make sure that underrepresented groups can have more opportunities, have increased opportunities in business and in sport. And that's the thing. It's not just about having a female driver one day. It's about, as we describe in this part of the podcast, all of the different roles that come together to put a race, on track every weekend, as it will be next year. And, that is the lawyers, the engineers, the wind tunnel technicians. It's all of these roles. So making sure that those opportunities are present both in business and in sport. But at the same time, public-facing representation is important. And as she's reflected, she's kind of saying that visibility of females in Formula One is really important, so that you have a face to show young girls, to show that this is something that is possible from any background, and you don't think, that job is for somebody else. That job is for someone who comes from a place that I'm not from, or is of a different gender or background. And that's all about inspiring, the next generation, but then creating those opportunities as well. And similarly on this topic, Chloe has a very similar perspective to some of the other people who we've talked about in terms of just the benefits of getting more diversity in the sport, in that, as she's kind of said, when we have diversity in the sport, we get better problem solving. When we get more diversity in sport, we get more innovation. And so obviously we have a huge amount of engineers, and better problem solving and better innovation is always going to be a good thing. So from a business perspective, it makes sense. We can generate more growth when we have better technology. And if we have better technology by having a more diverse team, then, that's a good thing. So just interesting to see that perspective kind of being reflected in her world as well. And her advice to other people.
It's a no-brainer.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And that sharing of ideas is critical when it comes to that kind of, diversity of, not just because it's diversity of thought that comes from different backgrounds and experiences, which means that you approach problems from different perspectives and angles. And like you said, this sport for the most part is so often coming up with ideas and solving problems. Whether that's to make a car go faster or trying to get a track on a new continent, when you can have people who are coming from that problem from a different angle, is going to help you get a better result.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think frustrates me often is that, and I see this a little bit on Twitter whenever I go there, which is once in a week, because I hate the platform more often than not. But
I can't figure out how to use it.
There's still this element that, oh, good, don't bother. There's still this element that, there's still this thought process amongst guys that girls only watch Formula One because they find a particular driver hot or whatever else, and they can't, possibly enjoy anything to do with it. So there's still such a long way to go, but the diversity element inside the actual sport itself is incredibly important, as you said. And why I love this part of the podcast is that hopefully, listener, you are finding this awesome as well, but we're meeting new people around the paddock, or at least being aware of them. And then when inevitably you start interviewing some of these people on this show, which I'm very much looking forward to when that happens, we actually get to, broaden that person's awareness. And I mean, the majority of our listeners are in Australia, of course, but we've got some wonderful listeners in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and around the world too. But in other bigger English-speaking markets, it isn't just the UK, means that hopefully people listening to this podcast, regardless of who you are, where you're from, whatever, if you feel like you want to work in Formula One, it doesn't matter if you're 16, 12, or 33, which is allegedly 50 now, years old. If you want to decide that you're going to change your mind to change into that industry, then you can. And I think it's so inspiring to listen to these stories, and even from just outside from the diversity of the gender point of view, just that these people are kick ass, like they are crushing it, whatever they're doing, and to think about working in this environment with promoters who will be, who have egos in some tracks, and some tracks will really want to get on the calendar, like South Africa, as you mentioned, would really want to get on the calendar. Kicking France to the curb probably would have been enjoyable, I guess. But it's such an important thing that, as you say, we get a diversity of voices.
Mm. And it's interesting, Chloe, kind of on that note, just in terms of being inspired, I suppose, by all of these other people working in the sport. Chloe says that she feels like she doesn't feel like enough has been done to truly open up access and showcase women working in the sport that have actually always been there. I think now we are starting to shine a light on, in particular, women, but people from all backgrounds who are in minority groups that are working in Formula One. It's like, in a way, they have always been there, but they weren't being put kind of front and centre. And actually, it's a really great place to work for everybody, and to build an amazing place to build a career. And so on that note, in her advice to others, her recommendation is explore and pursue every opportunity that comes your way, in that there are multiple career options in the motorsport industry generally, and just be really open-minded as to what career routes you might end up taking. In that, obviously, she went in to all of this with, as a lawyer. And now she's working with various governments and massive organisations to host Formula One events, which is not necessarily something I would say that she thought she was doing as she watched her dad tour in music. So really cool to see that come to life. So that's our profile for the week, Chloe Target Adams. So finally, James, we are going to Japan. And as you said, we're so excited to be here. The drivers are excited to be here. We haven't been here for 3 years. And our last winner was VB, which just, again, as we reflect on these races, Singapore was kind of similar in terms of these places we haven't been for a while, and just looking at the very last winner, it's often people who we haven't seen on a podium for a while. Narrow, high-speed circus. It could also be a circus.
High-speed circus.
Depending on what Latifi chooses to do. As you've said, Max can win here. Only Perez and Leclerc can stuff that up for him. He needs to outscore Leclerc by 8 points, Perez by 6 points. So a win and fastest lap will do it, kind of regardless of anyone else's results. So he's got a lead of 104 points over Charles, 106 points over Sergio, and there's still 138 points on the points left to go. Can't even speak.
On the table,
along with all of the food and all of the meat on the table. There's also 138 points still there, thanks to the remaining 5 races. So I think he'll probably do it here. If it's not here, it'll be the next one. It'll be that fastest lap point, and if somebody else is just a bit too close, but I think we'll probably see Max seal the championship here. It's not uncommon for it to be done here. I think it's happened 11 or 12 times. But what do you reckon his chances are?
Look, this Red Bull is so quick, and home crowd effectively with the power unit. It's very interesting that Honda has appeared on the side of the car again. It hasn't been there all season, but now it is back. I think, that Max is a great driver. Sergio's a great driver. I think in the debrief, or in the briefing room rather, the pre-briefing room, it will be, let's do what we can to help Max secure this weekend, because it'll be a great thing for Honda. As I said last week, it'll be a great thing for Red Bull and a great thing for Max. And the Japanese fans are next level. The amount of epic placards and hats and costumes and everything else going on there in the crowd already, and it's only free practice, is awesome. One thing that I would say as well from out of the press conferences, which I thought was really interesting and shows just how loved this track is Sebastian Vettel saying, I'm happy to come back in future to do a cameo appearance specifically at Japan. If anyone wants to just sign me for one race, that'll be good. I'll be very happy to do that. And I think he's right. I mean, the circuit itself is brilliant. It's incredibly technical, as I said, and it's incredibly enjoyable, I think, in a lot of ways too. There's a lot of great passing opportunities. Hopefully these new regulations makes it better again. There's been plenty of drama here in the past. We reviewed the Alain Prost and Senna incident that happened way back when. You can go back and listen to that podcast in the archives as our classic race review. But for Max, I think it makes sense for this weekend. The only thing that I can see stopping him would be someone like George or Lewis or Carlos, who maybe aren't, necessarily where they want to be, or they're out of position for whatever reason, pits to the second to last lap, puts some softs on and goes for fastest lap just to deny Red Bull the ability to have it. But knowing Max, if his quali goes well, he'll be able to pull out enough of a gap to respond to that and pit himself and then, pull it, because I reckon Sergio will be right behind him in second. As I said, the pre-briefing, it will be, no, you let him go first and everything will be happy.
That's what I think will be interesting, is actually the role that Perez plays in this, because I think, everything was much clearer last year as we got to the end of the season as to, who was, in a position to win the championship. And this year it's a lot tighter. And so I don't think that Perez will be as content playing rear gunner at this race in order to allow Max just to secure it earlier. I'm not saying that he won't do that, but I would be interested to see the team radio afterwards, that's for sure, because he's genuinely in a position to stuff it up for him, basically. Like, I don't think he's going to win the championship, but for the sake of another win under his own belt, I think he would find it very challenging to give that up, like I said, simply so that Max can close it a week earlier than he probably will otherwise, or a race earlier than he will otherwise. So it's just because of the point standing, you can imagine that's changing how they're feeling about the potential role that any one of them would play going into the weekend. But lots of new things to look forward to. Like you said, new cars on this track. We don't know quite what that's going to mean when it comes to how well they can overtake. We've got Mick, Yuki, Joe and Latifi all making their debut on this circuit. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But at the end of the day, home race for Yuki, which amongst those awesomely mad fans, I'm just really excited to see.
Yeah, it's going to be so good. I am so keen for this race. The other thing worth mentioning too is that by all accounts, we'll know probably after this podcast has come out. After we've recorded this podcast, but before this podcast is released, which is only in a couple of hours, Alpine will have announced Gasly to Alpine, and AlphaTauri will have announced Nick de Vries. By all accounts, that's going to happen this weekend, so we can finally tidy up a couple of seats ahead of whoever is going to be racing in that Haas seat for next year. But that's going to also be very interesting too, I think, because AlphaTauri being, the sister team or the junior team with Honda, and Red Bull, who knows, it's an interesting time to do that. So keep your eyes and ears to the screens, but racer.com is where I would go for that information. Don't bother with anything else. Like Speed Cafe is just the most useless Australian site. It writes articles based on other people's articles. It's not a good way of doing journalism. And let's all just have a bloody good weekend. The other thing to watch this weekend too is the Bathurst 1000. It's the only supercars race of the calendar. Tell me I'm wrong, Tilly Willy. There's no other races. It's just exclusively this one. No one else is watching anything else. I'm sure one of the drivers, I'm sure Shane Van Gisbergen's on 1.6 billion points at this time in the championship, and if he wins the 173 million on offer this weekend, then potentially he can clinch the championship. I don't know. There's too many points in V8 Supercars. I lost interest a long time ago, but Bathurst 1000 is a bloody good spectacle. It's going to be a kick-ass weekend of racing, Freya.
Well, this one is at a good time for you as well, is it not, for Suzuka?
It's in the daytime, so yes.
Daytime?
Yes, exactly. It's in the daytime in Japan. It's in the daytime here. Outstanding.
daytime for you as well, it does make for a very good weekend because your Monday won't suffer quite as much regardless of what happens. So I'm excited for that for you guys because I know you do suffer through the season at very strange hours of the day purely to commit to seeing something happen live. So a lot of respect for everybody in Australia who commits to watching races and enjoy watching it in the daytime. It's very enjoyable. Which I get to do on a regular
Not on the West
basis.
Coast. The West Coast often gets a good timing. So the West Coast, you put yourself in the bin. It's New Zealand and the East Coast.
They do suffer for so many reasons. All right, that's it for this week. Thank you for joining me, James. Don't forget, listeners, that you can support the show by either subscribing to our YouTube channel, grabbing some merchandise, or jumping onto our Patreon link via the link in the description below. Thanks for joining me. Have a good birthday, mate. Don't be too sad that 70 is only a couple of years away.
Oh, good Lord. Continues to get higher. No, thank you. Looking forward to this weekend. It's going to be a good one.
Sounds great. See you, mate. Dun, 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 dun.
Thanks for making me older each time you bloody said it.
Every time I did it. I hadn't actually planned to do that. And then I'm like, shit, I'm funny. I'm going to make this.
Oh, yeah. That's what you are. Great.